So hey, nice to meet you, everyone. Uh, so yeah, I'm Ankit. I'm CEO of OSlash. Before this, I've always worked in SaaS. So I'm more of an engineer. Started my career with Zoho. Had a startup before that, but my first professional career was with Zoho, where I was responsible for building their entire low-code platform. Which I mean, today it is called low-code. Back in the day, it used to be called cloud database. So I was, spent some time in Chennai, where Zoho is headquartered. Some time in Austin, uh, looked a lot into international market, and then we came back. OSlash was something we built internally at Zoho, like a personal hack, and a lot of people liked it, and hence it became a product. Uh, as a company, we have raised, you know, the first version of the product is out. You know, we have more than 1,000 workspaces using OSlash. Uh, we have raised money from people like Excel partners and uh, prominent sort of angels in the community. Like for example, founders of Figma, Notion. Some of them have invested in OSlash. We have been very fortunate to have some good people helping us in the journey. And yeah, right now, I mean, I think the reason I was asked to write this is because we wrote a very elaborate post which became very viral. Was how should someone how should someone think of ESOPs? And I think that's why the Rice team asked me to do the session. So I mean, there is a slide, but I like to understand and maybe like see how many people are, and let's just make the session more collaborative, right?
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
where are we in the journey of the business, right? So I can probably try to contextualize a lot, based on that. Also, just a heads up, uh, I have always worked in a very Delaware incorporation sort of setup. So a lot of these things I know about ESOP is very American incorporation oriented. That doesn't mean it doesn't apply. The core principles actually apply to even India. Some of the laws might be different. You might have to contextualize this. I know, I mean, you can ask me questions how this applies in India. I can give you some answer which I know, but whatever I recommend in this, you might want to speak to like someone who is senior in the HR that whether this can be done in India or not. Everything I've done is very US centric. OSlash is a US company. So I know US very well, uh, but it applies almost everywhere. Yeah. Uh, Great. So we'll have to know okay, we have fair number of participants now. So we'll have to understand where we are in the journey. Like how many of us are like first time founders? If you can guys raise hands.
Yeah.
I mean, you can do that Zoom raise hand thing.
Yeah. You can mention in the chat as well. Also, whoever is comfortable turning on their videos, please do so. And in the meantime, Ankit, just to give you a quick runaway of the entire session, we would first, of course, go ahead with your presentation. Ankit has some great content on his deck for ESOPs, covering almost everything that you need to know. And then, Ankit, we can skip into a quick question and answer round.
Yeah.
In between, I would just do a quick check of how the session is going for the community through a quick poll. But yes, apart from that, you can take the lead of the session here on.
Got it. Uh, so I think majority of us are first time founders. All right. And if is this the how many of people in this list have already done their ESOP, or do they have a ESOP policy in place? Raise hands. All right, just one. So all of us are new to this. Great. And I'm guessing all of us are seed stage company. Seed stage. All right. For people who haven't raised hands at all, like, uh, I mean, are we like Series A company, Series B company? Because I'll try to contextualize some of the discussion based on that, right? Uh, so all a seed stage company, can I generalize that? Yep. We have 5 results. All right, so I'll try to, I'll make it more stage agnostic. Great. So, and guys, feel free to interrupt, feel free to ask questions. It's like 20 people in the room, so I'm sure we can make it much more collaborative. All right. Uh, and I think a lot of what we have done with OSlash, in fact, you can read it online. Everything which I've done, I've actually made it public. But we will still go with the session, and let me just share my screen. Uh,
Yes.
so, okay, why this session? This is the agenda, right? More or less, we're going to run through why this session. Why should founders care about ESOPs? How equity is granted in companies today. We're going to run through some terminologies. And I mean, when we talk about ESOP policy, like we'll talk, what is this policy, right? Everyone talks about a policy, like what is policy in the first place? And finally, we're going to talk about how to implement it in your company. I can also recommend some tools, which if you are a US India incorporation, or even if you're an Indian company, like what tools you can implement to just get started and get all your paperwork done. And finally, some insights which we have learned from other companies and which we are going through ourselves as a business. So again, right, why this session? I'm guessing all of you are here, so kind of know why this is required. This is probably the most common form of compensation in tech companies. And if you think about compensation in tech companies, and this is something which, all of your founders, you should try to talk to people when you are, when you are hiring in your company, is make them understand what is compensation. A compensation in tech company almost always has three elements, right? You have cash component, which is your salary. You have the benefits, and this benefits can be insurance if you're giving like travel compensation, if you're giving like, I don't know, like, you know, food coupons, you're giving gym membership, things like that. All of these are benefits. That is one category. The cash component is just salary. And then finally, you have equity, which is ESOPs. So I think because maybe what I've learned, and this is from my experience interviewing in India, companies don't talk like that. Companies don't talk in terms of compensation. So there's a lot of confusion which goes down the lane, right? So, and and this is why you'll see me using this phrase compensation a lot, right? Then also, I think founders have like a lot of less understanding of what actually ESOP is, because when you're starting out a company, you don't even think about this. It's not like you're thinking about product market fit. You're thinking about how to grow the business. This is not something which comes to your mind. And finally, the big challenge is how do you explain this to employees? And I will actually share you one document which we have made for our own employees. You can feel free to copy paste and start using it in your own business. So big part of this is obviously attracting senior talent, right? Now, this is where you need to understand compensation very well. So as I said, imagine you're hiring someone and the salary is, $100,000, right? So if your salary is $100,000, that when we say salary is $100,000, we actually colloquially use that phrase, but what we actually mean is the comp is 100,000, right? On an average. Now, a comp is a mixture of, as I said, the cash, which is salary, the equity, which is ESOP, and the benefits. So always try to bring your job descriptions into comps, right? So when you're attracting a senior talent, and try to understand why ESOP came into picture, right? Like ESOP came into picture like all the way back when Intel was like, Intel was formed, like Fairchild Semiconductors was formed, right? And that like Intel came out of it, and they decided to give ESOPs because they couldn't hire some of those talent in the required salary price, right? So imagine you are hiring a very senior engineer, the salary is like upwards of 60 lakhs, right? Like you don't have money to give that kind of salary, right? I mean, today you have a lot of venture money out there, but back in the days, it wasn't that easy. So what people thought is like, yeah, I cannot give you that kind of cash component. I will give you ownership in the company so that you can feel more ownership. And this happens, and this is not something new, right? Like every CEO of a public company is given the same equity structure which you are giving to employees right now. I mean, it's albeit it's very higher, but like they're given the same equity structure. So yeah, and I think a big part of this is like you try to sort of motivate people, right? Because now you can tell them that they're aligned in the company goals. If the company succeeds, your ESOP becomes very high value, and it also succeeds. And as I said, make compensation package looks more attractive. Finally, you want to retain key talent. And I want to talk about how this is used as a structure to retain key talent. There are good side of ESOPs and there are bad side of ESOPs. And the most important thing is, right, like because some talent you can't just pay up, right? Imagine you're hiring a 60 lakh rupees engineer, you don't even have that kind of money. How will you get someone like that? It helps you save some cash, right? And it's sort of a compromise you're getting into, right? Now, this is how ESOPs were formed. Today, none of this makes sense. Big part of ESOP is actually used as retaining key talent, right? Because if company has money and if you raise venture round, you almost inadvertently have money to hire people, right? But you're using ESOPs as more like a retention thing. And I'm going to talk about how some terms are used in companies to retain talent. Uh, but let's first understand, what are the types of equity structures, right? Before we move to this, any questions still here? No questions? Everyone got it?
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to also drop in the chat and we can take that by the end of the session too.
Yeah, or open your mic, man. Like it's
Yeah.
completely okay. I'm
Yeah.
happy to answer questions. All right. So, one common question I usually get by the time this is there is, uh, why is ESOPs given as an equity structure, right? For example, let me just open a document in front of you so that you guys can. So I'm just going to open my own ESOP policy. And one question we get a lot from our own employees is, right, what is the need of an equity incentive, like an equity incentive plan, right? Why do people even give this? So a common answer here is that, as I said, right, you have three components of, if you zoom in here. So this is our policy. You will get a copy of this at the end. So don't worry about, taking notes or something like that, right? So one question is, why is it called an option, right? Why is it not like, why don't you just give shares to people, right? We'll answer some of these questions on the way, right? And as I said, right, there's cash, there's non-cash, there's ownership. So non-cash is benefit, ownership is equity, and cash is this. So these are some of the first question I get. Uh, so let's take that question from the start. So there are four types of equity structure. Uh, Again, some of this is very relevant to US, so feel free to contextualize this. First is the incentive stock options. This is very US centric thing. Why is it called incentive stock options? Because in US, there are certain tax laws that gives you tax incentives if you have this kind of option. The second one is NSO, that is non-statutory stock options. In India, we don't have a difference. We don't even have this terms. A stock option is a stock option, right? Third one is RSU. Usually you see this in very large company, like someone like Razorpay will actually issue RSU, because if you've reached like Series D, Series E company, these are basically like just directly giving stocks to someone and having a right to buy it. And I'll tell you why RSU is different from something else. And stock appreciation right is sort of like extinct right now. You don't see this unless it's a very large public company, and there is a guaranteed appreciation on stock and you're giving a right to buy it. So you don't have to worry about it now. Just know that there is a term like this. If a lawyer throws a term in front of you, okay, there is a term like option. But let's understand how it is granted today. The first question people ask is, why is it called option? Right? The reason it's called option is because you have to kind of understand how tax works almost everywhere in the world. You have an income tax, which is what you pay on your salary or your income which you make. Then you have capital gain tax. Now the capital gain tax is tax which you pay once your stock appreciates, whatever ownership you have appreciates, right? Now capital gain can happen on land, right? If you have a land which you have bought for like 50, 60 lakhs, you're trying to sell it for 2 crores, you have made a profit of 350%. That is a capital gain tax. Or you have, let's say, HDFC Bank, which, if you're very fortunate, your grandfather has bought it for like 20 rupees. Today, the stock is at, I don't know, 2000 rupees. You have a huge capital gain tax, right? So capital gain tax is almost there in every economy. Every country has it, right? India recently introduced capital gain tax, even for long appreciation, right? So we did not have capital gain for long-term holdings, but I think last year we had capital gain for long-term holdings. And the problem is this: if you directly give shares to your employees, right, and you don't, like, what happens is they will get a tax hit immediately. Right now, imagine your company, you're a seed stage company. It's valued at $10 million, right? and you are giving them stock at certain price, right? They will start getting a tax hit immediately, right? Which you don't want, and neither do they want, right? So you give them an option to buy the price or buy the stock at a specific price later in some time, right? But you have agreed to an agreement that this is going to come at a very discounted price, which is called strike price. We're going to talk about that, right? So imagine the share price of your first valuation is 50 rupees, right? But you're saying that, hey, you're joining my company. I mean, let's call that girl Megha, who is joining the company. Hey, Megha, you're joining the company. I will give you the right to buy this at $1, at 1 rupee, right? So she has an appreciation of that 49 rupees, right? But that's a guarantee you are giving it to her. And then finally, grants. We don't have that much grants in India, but you can still understand what it is, right? It's sort of like giving a direct share a promise, but usually it's just given it like without even a price of obligation. You can just get a grant. So let's start from the first, right? One common question, and this is something which founders do a very bad job explaining, is what are the different kind of shares? See, a corporation in the US, we call it C corporation. In India, we call it private limited company, right? When you form a company, you issue a certain type of shares, right? I'm guessing all of you have done it here, right? Uh, Anyone can volunteer and tell me what kind of shares they issued for themselves and for the others, for the investors. Has anyone raised any venture and round till now in this room?
Yeah, so we did equity shares for the founders and then CCPS for the investors.
Right. So, sorry, what was the name? I was trying to look up.
That's Dhruv here. I don't know which account I've joined from. Dhruv
Okay.
from Bugbase. Yeah.
All right. Hey, Dhruv, nice to meet you. So, yeah. So if you keep that, right, so you have something called common shares, which the reason it's called common shares. I'll get to that. And there's something called preferred shares, right? So you have these two types of shares when you are raising investor money, and I'm guessing all of us here in some time in the future will try to raise investor money. If not, even better, you will only have one type of shares, which is common shares, right? So when a company issues shares, common shares are given to people who are management, right? And so think of when we explained ESOP for the first time to our own team, we said in any business you have three stakeholders, right? Or you can kind of say, yeah, four stakeholders, but it's sort of like a concentric circle where you have the management, and management is all of us, right? Management is even founder, the CEO. If founder is acting as a CEO, she is management, right? And then you have all the employees. Everyone is management. You have the investors. You have customers. At the center, you have the service or the product which you're trying to do, right? So it's sort of like a concentric circle. But the money flows round and round, right? So the first time money comes from investors, you give it to management. Management builds a good product. The product makes some money, and the money goes back to investors, and then the cycle keeps going back, right? So this is a very simple way to visualize, because you need to understand what is the incentive here, why is it given, and why will VC also ask you to put a better ESOP structure, right? If you don't understand this incentive, this is where a lot of things go apart. So I always, whenever we have made a senior hire in OSlash, we keep telling them, you are coming as a part of management. You are answerable to board for doing all your actions. You're first answerable to the CEO of the company. Second, you're answerable to the board. So a company is a separate entity which you are doing. Then you issue two types of shares. The common shares are given to the management, right? The preferred shares, I mean, it's sort of the same type of shares. It just has more preference. Why does it have preference? Because investors have given you money and they have certain preference over the company based on management, over management. So for example, let's say you have, you have raised some angel round, right? Angels will be given preferred shares. Or if you have raised some convertible from a bank, startups don't do that. But if you're doing that, they will have rights to preferred shares, right? So it's almost like they have first right to something which you don't have right to, right? And hence there's this difference of common shares and preferred shares. Right? Now the common shares is where most of the option granting happens. You don't give options on preferred shares. At least I've never come across giving options on preferred shares. It happens when you're giving investors some rights, but almost always, options are given on common shares. Right? So you create first, a company creates something called an option pool, right? So imagine you have incorporated a company, Dhruv has incorporated a company, Dhruv has created X amount of shares, which are common shares, right? And out of that, he will put X percentage of common shares as option to give it to employees, right? So imagine the company has 100,000 common shares, and you say that I'm going to create 15,000 shares option pool, right? That means you have created an employee option pool of 15%, right? So you have to think on that way. Now, when you give a grant, right, employees sign a document where they have the right to buy something at certain price, right? Then there is vest, there is exercise, and then there is sale, right? So let's try to understand what are these terms. So first, the company is set up, and whenever you are guys, this is where if you are all planning to raise venture money, the first question investors are going to ask is how much is your employee ESOP pool? And as founders, I will say in modern times, 15% is expected. You can do it with 10% if you're a teacher's company and you are very, you yourself are also very sort of like, leading a function, right? Because you can say that if you're a very good engineer, you don't need to hire a VP engineering, so you don't need to create an option pool. So the first time you guys are raising money, this is coming from your pocket. So you have lost 10% of the company, right? But in the virtue of creating a very employee-friendly company, I think all of us should go for 15% because sooner or later, you will need that kind of ESOP pool in the business, right? So create a 15% ESOP pool. Let's say you have created. And, the question, again, most people ask us when it's like, how do they grant? This part, don't worry about what to do. Lawyers will take care of it. So grant is basically signing an agreement saying that X amount of shares. This is always, this is where I think it depends on you and how do you want to have communication. You can also say that, okay, so we have created 15,000 in the fiction company which we created. We have 100,000 shares. We have 15,000 shares option pool. Now we are trying to give shares to early employees. So let's say that you can say in percentage terms, or you can say in the number of shares. Your document will always show number of shares. So it's up to you what you want to say, right? When you're very early stage and you are hiring your first 10 people team, it's okay to say in terms of percentage terms. But as you start growing up, it's better to say in terms of number of shares because you will be raising so many rounds, percentage terms will not make sense, right? And number of shares becomes more valuable. So this is a legal document which they will sign. And this will have a lot of terms which are in the next 3 boxes, right? So first day is imagine employee joining you on, June 1st, right? And June 1st, they have the right, they have signed an agreement that based on certain conditions, which are vesting, exercise, sale, they have the right to buy certain shares of the company, right? And after that, the question comes as what is vest? Now, vesting, everyone goes through vesting. Even as founder, if you're raising venture round for the first time, you will go through vesting. Vesting is basically a way for us to kind of buy the right to the share, right? This is how I think of vesting, right? So it's like a time period, right? And almost always the standard vesting is 25% year on year, right? For the last 4 years. And vesting is like, okay, every year, 25% of the shares will be given to you. Right? Now imagine, imagine if there was no vesting, right? And for the discussion of ESOPs, don't think of founder employee, think of yourself also as an employee, right? Imagine you have 2 co-founders, right? And you have 33% of the company between all 3 of you, right? So the third person left without doing any work for the second month of the business, right? Now you guys are working very hard. The company grows big. In the 4th year, the companies become very huge. You can't have a freeloader in your team because, they still have 33% of the company, right? So usually vesting is saying that, okay, we will phase the ownership of the stock out. Now, this is usually decided by investors, but founders decide what kind of vesting schedule do they want to have. The standard vesting schedule across the world is 25%, 25%, 25% year on year for the first 4 years. But they also put something called cliff period. Now, what is cliff? Cliff is the first year which you have signed up in the company. You have to finish the first year to get the 25%. So imagine if you have 1 year cliff, that means the first year you have invest, you have to finish the first year, the whole year to vest your 25%. After that, it can vest either monthly or quarterly or daily, depends on what your company policy is. And these are the questions which you ask yourself, you will get answer to a better policy, right? I mean, we have made our entire ESOP policy public. You can actually go through it. We do monthly vesting, but it's up to you what you want. And I'm happy to go through like this decisions. And I'm guessing most of the founders here probably know this. You want to understand what goes into thinking, right? I'm happy to spend more time there. Then finally, you have an exercise. So this is like the what price or at what time period they will be able to exercise, right? So here, the question is, what is the strike price? Strike price is basically like at what price you're giving the shares. Imagine your shares, first time you have raised the money, your share is now valued at 50 rupees and you want to get the share as 1 rupees, right? That's completely up to you, right? You want to give them at 0? Sure, go ahead and give it at 0. The question is, I don't know how this works in India, but in the US, it's sort of frowned upon by the tax authority to give shares for nothing, because then it is treated in a very different way. So almost always we decide that give it at a very, very small price. So it doesn't even matter. For example, in OSlash, we give the shares at a price of, I think, $0.08, right? So sort of doesn't matter at that point, right? But the share price were valued at, I think the share price were valued that time at, I think, $8 or something like that, right? So, but we gave it at very cheap. Then finally, what time can they sell the shares? What is the liquidity event? And we'll talk about that also. Right. So moving further, right? I think one common question is, why don't you give direct equity? I sort of already answered that, right? You don't want your team members to have equity related tax issues, right? And then reduce just change. And a big part of when we decided our ESOP policy, right? We didn't want team members to lose equity for some sort of technicality issue. Like that is not something we want. For example, in the exercise, let me go back to the slide. You have something called exercise period. That means how long can you sell the share? Now, this is something controversial, and this is where OSlash took a stand. For example, if you have spent 2 years in the company, you can sell the shares for the next 10 years, right? But if you have not spent 2 years in the company yet, you only have 3 months in the right to exercise the shares. What I mean by exercise is you are paying the price at which you have been assigned. So imagine a 50 rupees shares have been assigned for 1 rupees. Just buy that share of 1 rupee so that you can take that shares. Otherwise, it's still an option. The share doesn't belong to you, right? To exercise that option, we give a 3-month window. The reason we did that was because the longer exercise period of 10 years, or 10 years is the maximum, is like sort of eternity. It becomes very difficult to track as the company grows, or who is doing what, right? So if you've not even spent 2 years into the company, we just ask them to exercise very early. If they have, we have made it 10 years. Now, this was a good decision back because we thought, this will be easier, but I think then we just changed it to 10-year exercise no matter what, right? Because now there are tools and all which can help you keep track of all this. So the technicality has become much more simpler. And then finally, so coming back to this slide, right? I was talking about how do you think about a policy? A majority of policy, right? Think in terms of how do you want, or what kind of company do you want to be, right? If you want to be a very employee-friendly company, you want to make sure employees have high ownership, then try to give sort of like a much more egalitarian, much more equitable ESOP policy. For example, longer exercise period is considered to be good, right? Imagine if your share increase is very high, let employees have time to buy the shares. Let them exercise for the next 10 years. What is wrong in that? Keep a very lower strike price, right? If you give a strike price of like, For 50 rupees, you're selling it at 10 rupees, is still higher, right? Some people might not have money to pay for that kind of shares. Keep a very low price. Go for monthly vesting. In fact, I made a huge mistake when I started out. Is like I did quarterly vesting because I thought who's going to manage it, like because it's easier to do quarterly. It happens 4 times a year, but monthly vesting is like every month. But today tools are there. You can completely manage it. Go for monthly vesting, right? No cliff. This sort of becoming a trend in Silicon Valley. I'm not a big fan of it right now. It's good to have cliff, at least 1 year cliff in your policy, right? So I'm not a big fan of this, right? And I think a cliff helps you decide what kind of people you want to keep in the company. Sometimes you make the wrong hiring decision in 3 months, and then you have also lost ESOPs on that, right? So make sure like at least 1 year cliff is there. Any questions to know?
Ankit, I actually have a question.
Yep.
So generally, what I've heard, right? Every time you raise for like a large round, usually the cliffs and all get reset, right? For the founders, the vesting and all.
Right.
So before the first round, does it even make sense? Like, how do you even, when you start the company, right? You get the common shares and whatnot for the founders. Do you even apply the whole schedule and vesting at that point of time, or is it just better to do it when you would raise your first major round?
That's a good question. So it depends on who you are, man. So imagine this, right? If you are a veteran founder and people trust you with your decision, you can do all of this before your first round. If you're a first-time founder, you're still trying to do it, a VC might strongball you to reset the cliff period, right? It can happen. Again, I'm not saying it will happen. Nevertheless, if you have already done through this, you have spent fair amount of time, ask for a VC to not reset it. But this is sort of like a very, it's a very tricky decision to have with your VC. Imagine like you're going into a relationship and asking for a divorce date, right? It's sort of like that. So it's sort of very tricky discussion, but at least for your employees, try not to change the cliff period because it's not fair on them. A founder can still go through a reset. Employees should not. So what we did was, even though we, after the fundraise, we did not reset the cliff period for employees. We actually gave them expedited. You cannot not reset it, right? You have to follow the cliff period. We just give them expedited vesting. So if they had a 4-year vesting, they said, we have 3-year vesting now. Right. So that's the way to, sort of have this discussion. But
Okay.
yeah, try to be very candid with your VC that, okay, this is the portion we're trying to do. See, they're only going to strong arm you into 2 things, right? First is creating a high option pool. If I've already done that, 12 to 15% is good. If they're saying 20%, then they don't trust you, right? Because in the first round, 20% is too high. A 15% ESOP pool is good. You're not going to use 15% of your company in your first 10 hires. At least in India, we don't do that, right? 20% is too high. That means they want you to lose ownership, because as a founder, you'll start losing ownership. Right.
Actually, I had a follow-up, and you had half answered it, but I'm not sure if it completely answers my question. So for the founding members, right, and early employees, so if you have a founding member who you do want to grant, we was thinking even like an equity straight up, right? But you mentioned options are probably better for them to. Where does it like make sense to get them onto equity, even since if everybody has the cliffs and the vesting period anyways? Because they're not like that senior where they've been like key, they've been a very core part of the team. They're a founding member, so it's probably like a single digit equity. Or again, I don't know, like I'm still not able to think through it clearly for like really key founding members, equity versus just option pools for everyone, because we don't have a ESOPs policy yet.
I think it's better to give equity, right? Option pool is better if you've already raised money and you already have an option pool in place. Right? If they have come from you before raising money, just give them direct equity.
Okay, awesome.
Right? Because see, I think that's the stand you have to take when in front of a VC, saying that, okay, I want to make sure these people are well trusted, right? So we make sure everything is extremely transparent. Right? But like for us, we sadly raised money. The first, before we, let's not use sadly. We fortunately raised money before we started the business, that we knew We knew the VCs. We were very lucky to know some VCs in the business. So for us, there was no such thing as early members. If there is someone is trusting you before you guys have raised money, give direct equity. And if it is a single percentage, it's a very high percentage, give them direct. Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking honestly, I don't know what the standard is, was more around like 4-5%. Is that
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, cool.
Depends, completely depends on you on what they bring to the table.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
And this is what I was saying, right? Allow RT members to have an equity setup similar to founders, right? So, this should see here also a lot of things are changing in the US, right? US is moving towards what you are saying, right? Having a more founder-like equity structure, even for employees, right? Just that tax laws are like also very sort of confusing around this, because US also doesn't have a good, I don't know how things are in India right now, but in US at least, and everyone in the world is following US, at least in terms of option exercising and taxation of options. US doesn't have a good option policy yet, or not. So the only thing they have is ISO, incentive stock options. For example, one confusion which we have is like we are hiring US employees and we have Indian employees. Indian employees get something called NSO, right? Which I was talking about in this slide. That is non-statutory stock options. It doesn't have any tax incentives, but US people have tax incentives. Just because you are in different location, like you get better tax incentives. So there are this confusion and people now start asking this question, especially in large company, right? They will start asking this question. Hence, if you see large companies like, Coinbase, Stripe and all, they have moved towards no cliff, direct equity grant or RSUs. Right? So again, I think one question here, most people is, what is the strike price calculation? Man, straight up answer, minimum discount, do it 90%. Right? A textbook, I can tell you that do this, do that, but go ahead and do it 90%. Right? Just do a 90% discount. That's bare minimum. If you can do 99, do it. Okay. Do not wait for, because so strike price is this, right? If your share price is 50 rupees, at what price do you want to give it to someone? Right? Give complete discount. Yeah. And vesting and cliff, some of the best practices, I said, companies are like Coinbase, Lyft, Stripe. Stripe actually removed the entire cliff also. You can start vesting day one. And there's a reason for it, right? In Bay Area, what happens is like, you also have a lot of employees who are just there in the company because their vesting is going on. I don't know if you've seen Silicon Valley. That happens, right? But in India, we don't have that problem, right? People have great opportunities. They just move around. So you don't have that kind of problem. I'll say keep cliff, because when you're starting out as a business, it's good to have a cliff period, right? But don't remove cliff. You can remove cliff after 4 or 5 years of the business and see how it goes. Again, everything I'm talking about ESOP policy is not like it's set on paper. You can amend it. You can change it. As a CEO, you have rights to grant it based on how much option pool you have created. Your board doesn't have a say in that. Your board only signs an ESOP policy once it is created. Only then you will need a lawyer. You will need a board to sign it. That's it. After that, it's completely up to CEO to give whom whatever they want. Great. Here also, I think, again, I don't know how this applies to India, the last point, in terms of exercise and conditions application on, like if there is some unfortunate event, what do you do it for employees? Talk to your lawyers, try to make it much more convenient. For example, if you're married, like we make sure ESOP goes to the spouse, right? If you're not, parents, I don't think is allowed, at least in the US is not. I don't know if in India it allows, right? You can transfer it to someone, but if you can, just choose a nomination, allow them to choose a nomination, right? This just will make them more employee friendly. So, and in terms of like, one big question is how to determine the number of ESOPs which people ask to be awarded, right? Based on fair market value. So one common question here is, what do you mean by fair market value of the company, right? So for us, so imagine OSlash raised the first round, in 2021, and we raised 2 million, right? So how do you say employees that, okay, what is the valuation of the company? In the valuation of the company, for example, a VC will be given a valuation, right? So let's say there's a company called X and they have raised 2 million and the valuation is 10 million. So 20% valuation, right? Very standard in the world. So imagine OSlash, right? OSlash is valued at 10 million. At 10 million, the question you ask is that the valuation of the company? Yes, that is the preferred share valuation of the company. That is not the fair market value of the company. What we are talking here is the fair market value of the company. So that's why, let me just go back to the presentation. I use this term. What is the fair market value? So what companies do is they go through a valuation exercise. Sorry, let me get the screen up. What companies do is they go through a valuation exercise where they will hire an valuation expert or an accountant. Almost always it is an accountant who will do a valuation of the company to find the price of the common share. See, preferred share can be very high value, but common share is less. Investors have paid you 2 million to buy, let's say 20% of a company, valuing the company at 10 million for preferred shares, not for common shares. So you have to value the company in terms of common shares again. Any question here? This is a little confusing for people. No? Great. So in US, what you do is something called, you do 409A valuation. So we have went through an entire 409A report. In India, you do a valuation just by any consultant, right? Any accountant will do it, right? And this is the same, like you have to go through a valuation and they will submit you a valuation report to say that, okay, your company is valued not at 10 million, which is the preferred share, but what is the common share valuation? Common share valuation for us was around, like, I think 4 million or something like that, right? So the entire valuation report was published, right? This is like a 40-page valuation report on how they came across that valuation, right? So they will publish all that. Now, the reason you do through this, again, you don't have to do this, okay? In US, also, you don't have to do this. The reason you do this is because you're going to give employees some discount on shares based on this fair market value. Now, tomorrow, if the company becomes very big, imagine, you have Razorpay shares, right? Razorpay is huge now, $7 billion or something like that. I don't know. What's the number, Aditi, right? 7.5 billion or something, right?
7.8.
There you go. 7.8. I lost the 300 there.
Yeah.
So at that level, tax authorities will come after you. So if someone would have got share price at a certain very low valuation, they will go and say, hey, how did you get shares at such a low valuation? Right? So you are proving that, no, this is a fair market value for future tax authorities, right? That's why you go through the valuation exercise, right? So now this is called 409A, and I've actually put links to it in this OSlash policy, which you will get after this. I'll send links to all of you, right? On how does this in US it's called 409A evaluation. In India, I think it's just called a valuation report. I mean, I don't know what's the term in India, but if I'll try to find out. But once this valuation is done, now you have understanding of what is the fair market value, right? And then you sort of decide on the ESOP, like the whole, ESOP compensation. Now also try to make sure your employees understand how is compensation, right? Again, go back to the first thing which I said, start with compensation. I think I've met a lot of people in interviews where they say, I have 100,000 shares, right? Or I have shares worth of 50 lakh rupees, right? That's okay, good. Shares worth of 50 lakh rupees means, again, imagine you have, and this is where apple to orange comparison cannot happen. So I'll give you 3-4 scenarios. Sometimes an employee will, we are interviewing a candidate and someone will say, I have, 10,000 shares of PhonePe. Great. PhonePe is valued at 15 billion. Do you think PhonePe will even double in next 2 years? Right? Or like 15 or 20 billion. That means PhonePe has to value at 40 billion. Right? So you can't compare a PhonePe share with an OSlash share, because OSlash share will multiply in every round, right? Every round your valuation is supposed to happen 5 times. Right? So you can't compare that. Also, that doesn't mean that PhonePe shares is not good, because PhonePe share is more liquid, right? There is a ready market for it. It's a late stage company. OSlash share might not be liquid. So try to have a more candid conversation with like employees on this kind of conversations. Second thing is, okay, I have 50 lakh worth of shares, and they will, and let's say if they're asking for a compensation of 40 lakhs, they will say, my salary is 90 lakhs. No, your salary is not 90 lakhs because it's 50 lakh divided by 4, right? Your ESOPs are getting divided every year. So imagine if you are trying to attract a candidate whose market salary is 100K, you can pay 80K. You have to give them 80K more of compensation, right? Because it will get divided by 4, right? And again, I think this number is wrong. There was a mistake. It should have been 4, and this is 20, right? But because you're trying to give 20K every year, so you have to give ESOPs available more of 80K. Is that correct? Any questions here? So because these are the shares they're getting every year, and obviously, right, this thing changes because tomorrow, your company will dilute more, so they will have more shares. So I always tell in terms of, okay, today in 1 year, you will get X amount of shares. See, a life of a good tech employee is 2 to 3 years, right? Be realistic. In 2 to 3 years, what is the best agreement you can give it to them? That's the question you should ask yourself as a founder. Right? I mean, if you have someone going after 4 years and have fully vested 4 years, you are the luckiest person out there. Right? But in a 2-year compensation, try to tell them that, okay, so I can pay you 80K in cash. I'll pay you 80K extra in ESOPs. Now 80K extra in ESOPs, now you have to divide by the number of shares. Now here, the question is, as a founder, what should you take? Should you take fair market value or should you take preferred share value? Again, I think most of the founders just directly take a preferred share value and then divide it by preferred share value. So imagine a company is like 9 million company. They will say, okay, 80K of 9 million, kitna hai? They will divide the shares and they will give the shares. Again, it's up to you guys, right? Think in terms of number of shares. Right? I mean, the number changes obviously drastically because your fair market value will be at least 40-50% of your preferred share value. So if you're taking fair market value as a division number, obviously the number goes up. Again, I don't think anyone has a good answer here, right? It's just based on what you want to do. I mean, preferred share is easier to calculate because, this number is always there in your mind, right? People know, okay, it's a 9 million company, it's a 100 million company. So people just divide that and keep giving more shares. So try not to have conversation in terms of percentage point. Always try to have conversation in terms of number of shares. Keep giving. In fact, in OSlash, we give shares every appraisal. Like every 6-month appraisal cycle, we give more shares. And it's a choice, right? You can either take more salary or you can take more shares. You can take both, right? Like sometimes share is just given as a bonus. Yeah. Yeah, this is usually very confusing. Any questions here? Can you move to next slide? So as I said, right, imagine companies validated.
Hey, Ankit, just to stop you there, we have a question in the chat from Jatin on FMV. Can I read
On
that?
FMV? Yeah, please go ahead.
What FMV valuation do you take into account if you are a SaaS company based out of Delaware, but may have an entity in India as well?
Right. Doesn't matter. Right. We have the same incorporation structure, Jatin. So see, your ESOP policies are not done based on different entities. It's done on parent entity. Right. So if you have a parent entity in Delaware, which I'm guessing if you are a US incorporated company, you'll have a Delaware incorporation. Doesn't matter what is happening outside. In fact, ESOP policies are done even at Google or any global company. These are done in the HQ level. They are not done in local geographies level. Comms can be different. And I think that kind of brings back to that discussion that your comms is different. See, if you're a company like, okay, so imagine you're a very forward thinking company, right? You are Airbnb. Doesn't matter anyone is working from, comm remains the same. I think that's a statement the CEO gave lately, right? Then everything doesn't matter to you. But if you're at Google have different comms for different geographies, right? The same engineer in the US might have $500,000 salary, but in India, they might not have $500,000 salary. They might have like a, 100,000 or 150K salary. So they have like some price discrepancy ratio. Now, if your comms is that, then their ESOPs will change. Because in US, Google has to pay 100,000 extra, but in India, they have to pay only 50,000 extra, right? So those discussions you have to keep in mind. Always think in terms of comms when you are hiring talent. And your comms is cash plus equity plus benefit. Yeah. Great. Any other questions?
No, I think we are good. But just a quick time check to have a Q&A round followed by this.
Oh shit, yeah, we're running out of time. So again, as I said, fair market value is almost 40%. So imagine your seed stage, the company's at 10 million. So 40%, it goes up, right? And your strike price will also change that way. So, I mean, again, here, when it comes to strike price, just do a 90% discount. Don't overthink it too much, right? Great. So vesting, as I said, cliff is 1 year, and then you go through the 4-year vesting. I mean, there are some scenarios where vesting can be taken over, but I will say in most of the cases, if they have vested, even if they're resigning or unless they have like sold some company rights to some competitor, have done something very bad behavior, you can take over their vesting rights. If not, just give it to them, right? All the vesting shares should give it to them. The unvested shares doesn't belong to them anyway, right? So this is the right thing to do. Finally, exercise window. As I said, it's becoming longer and longer, right? Today, exercise windows are 10 years. If you're incorporating a company in 2022, I'll say just go for 10 years, right? Don't even think about it. Taxation, again, different geographies have different say. Upon exercise, you don't have taxation in India. In sale, you have taxation in India. Okay, exercise is like buying the share, right? You don't have any tax issues in India. You can, if already some upside is being given, like an RSU and all that, but mostly you don't. So finally, in terms of implementing ESOP policy, right? I'll say write these thoughts down. Like when we did in OSlash, I actually wrote, like for example, an internal ESOP plan for everyone, right? And I ran it through Word, and I'm just showing you the slide. Like all our investors put their comments here, and then we decided, okay, what is the salary? What is the percentage should be given, right? And then we went to a lawyer to say that, okay, let's guys make a plan based on this. Like communicate the ESOP policy, make it easily accessible to everyone. In OSlash, people just go to OSlash ESOP policy. This is actually public, right? I'll share you this link in the room. Just go and use that policy and give it to others. This is an employee-focused ESOP policy, not a legal policy. The legal policy has to be built by legal. It's a 30-page document which they'll have to sign, right? And do one company-wide session, probably every quarter, to explain how ESOP works. Right? We do it like for every new person, or HR does it. We teach them what ESOP is, how to decide about ESOP, and things like that, right? And finally, there are good tools. I mean, the most popular for the global company is Kata, right? You can look at Kata, and Kata does it very well. There are modern companies which are coming up called Pulley. Pulley is a ESOP. I think Stripe has backed them. Yeah, Pulley is a good tool for cap table solutions. In India also, there are tons of cap table solutions. Any solution is good. They'll be able to help you out. So there are a bunch of cap table solutions. So, great. So finally, some insights. The earlier you create your pool, it is better. The best employee, as I said, deserves 12 to 15% of the ownership pool. Be flexible with your ESOPs. Try to listen to your employees. If there is a genuine reason, like try to be on the right side, right? Because I mean, they're working in a growth stage company. You want to make sure value is transferred, and yeah, just provide the fair terms. That's it.
Hey, sorry, a quick question before other people jump in. How do you enforce the founder equity cliffs and all and the vesting? Is it
that comes as a part of your financing agreement, man? It's not part of ESOP policy. Like
so you can't do that before the round if you wanted to.
You can do a founder agreement with your lawyer.
Okay.
If you've not done your first round, do a founder agreement with your lawyer and say that we have vesting between us.
Okay, awesome. Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you, Tejas. Thank you so much, Ankit. A very, very insightful session. Completely all over A to Z about ESOPs. Thank you for having us go through it. We are almost on time with the session, but if you have a couple more minutes, we can see if the community has some questions to ask you. Or if not, what I can also do is take in their questions and send you to them over an email, and maybe you can get back to us with the answers.
I can take 5 minutes. Is okay. I mean, any questions on ESOP, guys, or even fundraise, I'm happy to answer it for the community.
Go ahead.
I'm Rohan. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Hi, Ankit. Thanks a lot for the session. It was really, really informative. Learned a bunch of new things today. The question I had is like the reason the whole ESOP thing is that an employee would prefer an ESOP, prefer to have skin in the game to potentially have exponentially better returns in the future. Right. So what ideally is the time period for that? Is it 5 to 10 years? And how do they liquidate it? Is the question. I mean, you can sell them that, but like the question is liquidity at the end of it, right? Even after 5 years or 10 years.
And so, I wanted to show you this, right? When we work with companies, right, I try to be very transparent with people because I think, see, tech companies, right? I'm guessing most of you here are building tech companies, right? They will turn in tech companies very soon. Some employee you might be hiring will probably hire you in after 5 years, right? I've seen like people younger than us building dev tools and all, which are, becoming very successful. Try to act like what you expect someone to act on your behalf. So we actually share this at the end. So we send a proposal to people when they join the company, right? This is, for example, a proposal to someone who's joining the company, right? Okay, this is their role. We welcome them to the company, their compensation, their benefits, and things like that, right? So this is the last slide. And if you just read through it, what I'm saying is the lower bound value of a grant option is 0. That is also the default value. So don't think of ESOPs as like everything. So imagine if you're interviewing someone and someone is from not so fortunate background, don't try to screw them up over ESOPs. Give them cash. They need cash more, right? You can always give them more ESOPs in later. But if someone is well off relatively and understand that ESOP is there, let them take that decision. Don't try to force that decision on them. Right? As a founder, I think you should give them right direction. Don't try to force it. So every time when I've come from someone where, they don't understand ESOP very well, they think or maybe from the interviews you have learned that, okay, I think they need cash more right now. We don't try to strong arm them into taking more ESOPs. We give them more cash and we say, okay, yeah, we will try to make it up as a right to the company. We'll try to make it up in future rounds. Right? So we share this with everyone at the end of their hiring proposal that it is worth something in the future. That is icing on the cake. The best venture funded company returned 10x or more. The upper bound of your grant is most likely 10x. So if you're getting, 10,000 shares at a price of 15 lakhs, expect to make 1.5 crores. If everything works out well. If not, don't have unrealistic expectation, right? So try to, feel free to copy this, man. Take a screenshot or something. This session is recorded. So
already did.
Yeah. All right. So there you go. And I think let them choose, right? Like I always tell them that to compare equity across, choose the company you believe is most likely to become a best company. So we never try to, and this is also, see, for very senior management, they understand all this. For people who are starting out their career, right? 3-4 years into the business. If I think of a younger version of myself, like I will probably have the same question. Is the PhonePe ESOP same as OSlash ESOP? Probably not. But also PhonePe ESOP is probably also more liquid. But OSlash ESOP can grow faster. I need someone to tell me that. Right. So, and again, see, this is the last point. Even if you succeed and your grant becomes very valuable, you may have to wait years to realize that value. Right. And this is where you start seeing, I think, startups are doing like ESOPs buyback, right? Like Razorpay did, I think 2 ESOPs buyback and things like that. It takes time. You need to have liquidity event in the company. Even if a company is like a $400 million company, there's not necessity that there will be a liquidity event. Right? So that's why you have to be very generous. See, ESOPs are not like a panacea for all your cash crunch, right? Honestly, if you ask someone, Google might not grow 10 times, but at least it's a liquid ESOP. Like the share can be realized, right? But you have to grow 10 times. So you have to be extra more generous in playing that bet. So try to be very generous with your ESOP policy. Give people a lot extra. And also, if you're venture funded, don't cut on cash compensation. Unless you are hiring some very senior management and you can't even pay that kind of cash. That's a whole different discussion, right? But don't try to cut on cash compensation just because you're giving extra ESOPs. That's the right thing to do. Right? Any other question? I'm not leftist. I'm just thinking that as a startup community, we should do right with everyone.
Very ethical, Ankit. Yeah.
First of all, thanks. This is actually quite insightful. And second is, are there only these two ways? One is IPO, which is of course, I think the ultimate end of like valuations and everything. And second is buyback. Is there any other option an employee can get?
I think Freshworks in India did. So there are like firms which are very focused in buying employee shares. So SteadView Capital, there are some of them like that. So you can also have a round where all the employees pull together to sell their shares. So, and I think, remember when I was telling you that in US, there's this whole thing going on where founders shares and employee shares, there's not much of distinction, right? So the world is moving toward that direction, right? That means imagine if a founder is doing a secondary sale. Secondary means where founders sell certain shares to get some liquidity in future round. Usually it happens in series C and D. In India, it's happening in series B also, which is actually, sort of very surprising. In series B, you can't have secondary because it's too early, but still it happens, right? So if you are having secondary, then give your employees also a right to have some secondary, right? So it's sort of that. So I think secondary happens, but it's not still a standard way of doing it, right? So it's very rare. I think in India, I've seen Freshworks have done some secondary. Flipkart did some secondary when very late stage, right? Before going public, usually some secondary happens on ESOPs, right? But it only happens in a time where you don't want it to happen because you don't even need money at that point, right? Because the company has already missed, you probably have a very good salary. So everyone who did Freshworks, secondary, I don't think they even needed that money.
Great. Thanks, Rohit and Ankit. We have another question from Habit Coach. Please share your name also. Yeah.
And sorry about that. Yeah, hi, this is Samvid. Thanks, Ankit. That's definitely very insightful for the presentation. So I wanted to have an understanding of how do you have the compensation discussion with senior engineers, right? I think that's one thing I'm sure a lot of companies are currently struggling with. I saw there was a particular table on your ESOP policy highlighted a specific amount.
But it's nothing to hide here, right? We try to, at least in OSlash, everything I'm trying to do, I try to kind of make it transparent. So I can share that table here again if you want. See, this is the US norm, right? Again, this is something which I was thinking when we were doing it. Sorry, my bad. Yeah. Can you see the screen?
Yeah, it's visible.
Right. So if a lead engineer, 60 to 100% of their salary is good amount, right? So let's say if you're getting someone at 50 lakhs, either give them 50 lakhs worth of ESOPs or 40 lakhs worth of ESOPs, right? 5 years, 20 to 50% of the salary, like, because the percentage also changes, right? Manager, junior engineer, and it goes then VP, can go to 1 to 2%. Like VP is the highest, right? It goes even higher. So it's up to you, right? Again, the percentage terms doesn't, either you think in terms of percentage terms where you're very early stage or think in terms of salary, right? This number doesn't make, it's almost always the same. If you're a seed stage company, this too is almost the same. If you're paying someone 60 lakhs, it's coming to 1% of the company anyway, right? So that's the good way to decide. And try to see what the market rate is, right? Like, don't think internally, think on their behalf, right? How are they thinking in terms of ESOPs? If the market rate is that much, we are a tech company. The market for talent is what it is. You can't deny that. Just give it out, right? Like, if you think someone deserves that kind of money, give that kind of money. Right? If you can't pay cash, give higher ESOPs. Even go 1.5 times your salary if you can. But I think also, if you've reached a stage where you have a board and all, try to consult your board member. They will tell you what is the right thing to do. Because you're hiring someone with 1 crore kind of compensation as senior engineer, I'm sure your board will get involved.
Right. So actually, just to clarify, so let's say somebody does have a ballpark figure around like a 1 CR. Then what you're suggesting is that you give an equivalent amount over and above the cash compensation and not really focus on reducing the cash compensation upfront. Is that
So it depends. Okay. Yeah. So if the question is, so let's say the market price is 1 crore, right? And then try to break down into the cash or ESOPs.
Hmm.
So I usually do that. Like, for example, if, so this is a standard which I showed you, right? Like, but if, or imagine someone, usually, it depends on how you think what is the market price also, right? Like, for example, a 5 years engineer, I don't know how you think the market price is good or bad. So usually what I think is, okay, so we have a number in mind whenever we hire a senior person that, okay, this is a 60 lakh position, but if someone is asking for 1 CR, we have already gone beyond. So we will try to keep cash at 60 and then we will go beyond that as ESOPs. But we already have that cash budget in mind, then we will not try to cut that much. Right now, but if the person also think about this, right? And it also depends on some people to people. If the people are moving towards right, some of very like moving companies a lot, and they are actually giving like 50% appraisals. If they are already taking 50% appraisal, then I think ESOPs might not be the right tool for them. Give them cash and move on, right? So you have to understand what the candidate is and what is the right structure for them, right? So sometimes when I think they value cash, we give them cash because they will not understand ESOP anyway. So you're just losing out on ESOPs. Give ESOPs to people who value it. So that's why that number, right? Even if I see sometime I've made exception where we don't even have the budget and then we give them cash and we give them ESOPs because I think I wanted them to stay in the company.
Right.
Yep.
All right. Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you, Ankit. Everything you speak of, I think it speaks highly about the transparency and the culture you have been creating at OSlash. I think very employee friendly, very ethical in its own ways. So really appreciate that.
Oh, thank you.
At the same time, I didn't want to break the flow of your session, but we usually have now started doing the quick poll check in terms of how people are finding the session so far. So you all are seeing the poll on your screen. It would be amazing if you can rate Ankit's session on a scale of 1 to 5. Ankit, you can do it for yourself also if you want.
Yeah, I can. I was going to ask this question now.
Yeah. But yeah, amazing. Do we have any more questions or Ankit, would you like to take any more questions? Do we
Yeah,
have
sure, why not? It's
the community?
Friday evening. I mean, it's okay.
Okay,
So
you are,
you,
yeah.
sorry.
That's-
You just mentioned like you would go above and beyond in this particular case. So you would have expanded your pool for that particular person?
I have, man. I
Okay.
actually have.
Okay.
But we have not reached a position where we created a large pool.
Okay.
Day one. But and because we are so OSlash is a little different because we did not raise a price round. We kept raising convertible. So our funding is very close to how Notion raised money. Probably because also Notion is people from Notion are the largest investors in OSlash. So we didn't raise price round. So our pool never changed. This is controversial. Again, I'm not going to advise people to do this. The benefit here is employees, even today, if someone joins OSlash, they join it's like day one. So even if the company valuation is like a little higher from the day we started, because we have not raised a price round means we have not put the price to the share, right? We have only raised the first round and then we have convertibles. It's still converting. So all of them get day one shares. Why we did this? Because again, I think when you're starting out, man, like the color of money is not green. This is the recommendation I give to every founders. Don't try to jump on valuation. So the color of money is not green. Try to do right thing in terms of the company. And if you keep pushing valuation higher, and I'm sure Razorpay founders did the same thing, right? In the early days, right? You put valuation very high, you will have to justify that valuation someday or other. This is what is happening today in the market, right? Everyone is talking about the 2 years of recession and things like that. Someday you have to justify the valuation. But when you do convertibles, it's almost like you are, kind of delaying that. So it's good. You can work with small money.
No, that's very insightful because I didn't think that you could do convertibles above like 1 million.
We did a large convertible, I can tell you that.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool. Awesome.
So our last round, which went public in PR, was entirely convertible. And we did not even have a VC. We did an entire operator-led round.
That's
I've written about that in like OSlash. I can, if you want to raise convertibles, there's a complete document I've written on how to do it. I think this is modern. I don't know why not that many people do it. This is
No,
a
I mean,
smart way of doing it.
we've done the pre-seed, like the first check we got, it's a convertible. So we're doing that, but I didn't think that you could keep doing it for like really large sums.
You can try to talk to your investors. There's a link
Okay.
here on how to do
Awesome.
a convertible, even with angels and even further, right?
Yeah.
Like,
This is awesome. Thanks.
I was just about to write in chat that Ankit, you are a blessing for understanding ESOPs. You have a document for everything, and you have made it public. That's really amazing. Do we have more questions for Ankit? Some of the founders have asked me for the recording of this session. They had to jump off on another calls.
yeah, sure.
So I'll be sharing the recording in our Discord community, of course. I'd also share these resources from the chat section that Ankit has shared. If you have more questions, we can definitely take maybe 1 or 2 more of them, or else we can definitely go ahead and wrap up the session as well.
Or you can shoot me an email. I'm putting my email here.
Yes, that's amazing. Any more questions by anyone? I would take the silence as a no then. Yeah.
Great. Have a nice weekend, guys. Thank you for this. And yeah, keep building good stuff.
Yeah, Ankit, thank you so much for being here. It was a really insightful session. Absolutely enjoyed it. And thank you so much for your time. It
Take
really
care.
means a
Bye-bye.
lot. Yes. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Ankit. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone else. Thank you.